The COVID issue was there. The whole world was, in fact, at a complete halt. Interestingly, the factories were shut down. There was no business taking place. The distribution networks got disturbed, so on and so forth. And eventually, that resulted in negative growth of so many economies. Later on, the moment things settled down, the economy started improving, and then this Ukraine-Russia war started in February 2022. And as we all know, whether you talk about the edible oil, you talk about the production of wheat, you talk about fertilizer, 17% of the global fertilizer is produced in Russia. 29 to 30% of the global production as far as wheat is concerned, Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine cannot export because there is a blockade. They can't send their ships out. They're full of the grains though. At the same time, you talk about sunflower, cooking oil, edible oil, there are issues. And definitely the infrastructure has been, the way it has been targeted, I think it's an example and a half within itself. Now, Ukraine crisis disrupted the global food and energy supply chains because Russia is a major supplier of energy to Europe. When you talk about coal, you talk about petroleum products, or you talk about natural gas. Many countries are 100% dependent. Many countries are 70%, 60%. And almost 40 to 45% of the overall European nations are dependent on the energy resources coming in from Russia. Now, Russia is under sanctions, so they will do whatever they have to. Now, when you talk about the major economies, they are facing highest inflation in generations. You talk about UK, you talk about United States of America for that matter, 40 years highest inflation ever recorded. Talk about Pakistan, yesterday the State Bank of Pakistan increased the interest rate by 150 basis points. Now it is 13.75. 13.75 in the current scenario, and interestingly, it's almost as close as the inflation is. But inflation most likely is going to go up. And mind you one thing, how much can you increase your interest rate? That is going to be a question and a half in the coming days. When you talk about the IMF, obviously the deal has started, but what sort of terms and conditions would be imposed? One thing is very sure, that your petroleum products subsidy would be taken away. The prices can literally jump and cross 200 rupees a litre. You talk about dollar, it has already crossed 200 psychological level. You talk about the subsidies on the electricity bills for that matter, or energy, that is going to be taken away. So there's going to be an increase over there as well. Imports, almost, or they call it the luxury items, or perhaps imports have been banned now, productive and non-productive. So let's see how things shape up regarding that. And then last but not the least, the mountain prices curbing the economic growth and shaking global financial markets. Look at the stock market of Pakistan, the way it is behaving, 18 months low. That is what the number is. But before I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that first.
Leaders from around the globe are congregating in Davos, Switzerland for World Economic Forum's annual meeting 2022. 2,500 participants who are attending this forum are cumulatively trying to find ways to tackle global issues and find solutions to world's most urgent challenges, including ongoing global pandemic, war in the Ukraine, geoeconomic shocks, and climate change. At the invitation of President of World Bank Economic Forum, Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is also attending the forum's annual meeting. The Foreign Minister will share Pakistan's perspective on the economic and social impacts of the evolving geopolitical developments, as well as the challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, food and energy security, and climate change. The recently released World Economic Forum's Chief Economist's Outlook 2022 report showed extremely high uncertainty regarding geopolitical developments and the global economy. The report stated that instead of entering a post-COVID recovery phase, global economies are experiencing additional shocks in the form of war in Ukraine and respective geopolitical repercussions, as well as the new outbreaks of COVID-19 and lockdowns in major industrial centers. These global challenges are leading to the downward revisions of world's growth prospects and are exacerbating inflationary pressures, leading to the raised oil, gas, food and commodity prices. This inflation is threatening lives and affecting the cost of living across the world. Moreover, the report added that the capital flight and currency depreciation is affecting the low and middle income countries adversely. Hence, this report summarized that such global issues are making the global economy entering a new phase of high volatility, and with fair mechanisms for global coordination and collaboration, effects on the most vulnerable economies and individuals are being compounded.
Now, to talk about this, we have with us in our studio, on my right is Fahim Sardar Sahab, Senior Policy Specialist, SPPC. Sir, thank you very much for your time. And we also have with us on Skype, Sana Tawfiq Saiba. She is the Senior Economist and Senior Research Analyst at Arif Habib Limited. Ma'am, thank you very much. Pleasure to have you on the show. And we'll also be talking to Dr. Niaz Murtaza. He is a political commentator. He's going to join us on the telephone. But let me put this first question to you, Sardar Sahab. Now, in fact, very interesting facts and figures have been released, and World Economic Forum, I think, is one of the most credible forums as far as the economic outlooks look is concerned, whether you talk about Asia or global or any individual country. Now, the interesting fact is that in 2021, the global, despite all odds, Corona and COVID-19, whatever was there, interestingly, the global growth was projected to slow down from an estimated 6.1% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022, and most probably a similar trend is going to be seen in 2023. Now, sir, Ukraine war, effects of Corona in the moment we started recovering, this war started. And obviously the war has more impact because it is directly related to your food prices, availability of the food, grain basically. These two countries are major suppliers, whether you talk about energy or you talk about food or you talk about fertilizer or you talk about edible oil. I mean, there's so much they offer to the globe. Now, in this current scenario where Zelensky seems to be, totally backed by the Western countries, and he believes that he's going to win the war, whereas Vladimir Putin, he means business and he's looking upon Zelensky as a joker. To be very honest, I mean, this is how he looks. He doesn't look upon him as a proper, hardcore, trained politician, unfortunately. But Vladimir Putin has been in power for the last almost 22 years. Now, sir, this war seems to be never ending, unfortunately. There is no effort, genuine effort, put in by the, I would say, the real stakeholders, not knowing that what sort of an effect it is going to have on Europe. But, sir, obviously, these are the digits. I can't deny these. Your take.
Thank you for having me. Any international conflict which happens, especially near an economic zone or near, let's say, food growing areas, is going to be very painful for the world. One of the aspects of globalization is that countries have started to go for cost-benefit analysis, comparative advantages. So you just import something that is cheaper. It seems cheaper to import than to grow or manufacture in your own country, which is something which, I mean, it's not very healthy for any country to be completely or partially dependent on some other country. Now, on the face of it, the numbers add up that you should be dependent on other countries because it's cheaper. Now, here we have in front of us a very clear example that if you are dependent on another country and something happens, you are isolated and exposed. Now, the food security issue on earth has become a big question mark because with the war in Ukraine, it appears that this is going to be a long drawn-out conflict because that is perhaps what the original objective was, to create a buffer state, or I mean, I won't get into that. But having said that, when we look at the economic scenario of this world, already the COVID had caused a lot of trouble throughout the world. A lot of economies had to retool themselves, change themselves, reconfigure themselves towards electronic marketplaces, electronic interfaces, electronic transport concepts. I mean, it was very difficult. I mean, offices became geographically neutral. Having said that, suddenly you have another conflict, and this time in the heart, not in the heart, but in Europe, which is now, it doesn't appear to be ending anytime soon, and Russia doesn't want it to end, it appears, because Russia just got better gas prices for many of its clients. So Russia is making money out of this. So we have to look at it from a broader perspective. And when we look at the world growth, I mean, actually the World Bank has estimated that 3.2% is going to be the world growth rate. So every single year, all economic institutions are revising the growth rate downwards. Started off from 5% and down. So now if any country, if we can say that the world is going to grow at 3.5%, that's going to be a long shot. If the world is not going to grow as it should, that means we're headed for a very slow recovery, economic recovery. Having said that, Pakistan achieved a lot by growing more than 5.5%. This was the second year that we were growing. This was certified by IMF as well. Having said that, we have to ensure that we can somehow insulate ourselves from this food inflation, from this food requirement, because we will be importing 3 million tons
of wheat.
And we have to, because right now we've been exposed by the high oil price. By the way, let's be fair, 15 years ago, the oil prices were close to this price. But
so 2008, if I'm not wrong, April, May, it went up to 147
yes,
dollars a barrel,
and
the dollar was at 61 rupees in Pakistan.
That's the difference. That is the major difference. I was just about to say that, but thank you for sharing that. The free fall of the rupee was allowed, which I mean, personally and professionally, I was completely against this. You have to manage a currency. You never let a currency fall.
But Fahim Sahab, they always believe that let the market forces decide about the rupee value. So a lot of analysts even now believe that it is going to hover around 220 rupees. That is going to be a nightmare.
It is going to be difficult, and I just don't agree with the statement that the market is going to decide when the market itself is in a state of flux. It is the job of the government to maintain a semblance of normality or a semblance of balance. No country on earth allows its currency to be traded in such a volatile manner. And I mean, we have like hundreds of examples, starting off with the most developed to the developing countries. A currency is always allowed to trade freely within a band. You can broaden the band, you can allow more free trade of the currency, but you always have a floor and a ceiling within which the government has to step in. Right now what's happening is, with the fall of the rupee and the gradual rise of the oil price, partially due to the Ukraine-Russia crisis, we have had to, actually we're paying more for oil than we were the last time prices were at this level. So I mean, that's what's really caused this problem, this fiscal tightening that we're facing right now, which has forced the government to restrict unnecessary imports. So we're trying to save some money so that we can position ourselves better.
Well, let's see, sir. Tough times ahead for sure. I think we should be prepared for the times that are approaching. But coming to you, Ma'am Sana Tawfiq Saiba, obviously you are directly linked with the stock market and with primarily with the capital markets, and you understand what exactly is going on out there. Ma'am, the stock market's behavior, I want your comment on that. And do you believe that these micro level issues are to be blamed, like political uncertainty for that matter? Or you think the macro environmental factors, the global issues are really prevailing or overwhelming the overall situation?
So basically, yes. So Pakistan's stock market and certainly its economy has suffered a great deal, I would say, due to the growing political clouds in their country. And while high inflation and pressure on the external account that we are facing right now, has been the talk of the town, but I think much is to do with the international commodity prices. Since these high commodity prices and the super commodity cycle, as we name it, has caused a massive demand supply disruption across the globe, not only in Pakistan. So yes, it has been a challenge to bring the food inflation down and the overall problems and challenges attached with it. Moreover, the measures taken by the outgoing government, the relief measures, fiscal relief measures, I think it is about time that the incumbent government reverses the subsidy package and on fuel and electricity. So this has been a major hurdle, as we all know, in the ongoing talks with the IMF. So, and international oil prices also remain downward sticky. So this subsidy too appears more and more, I would say, unsustainable with each passing day. However, removing it immediately obviously would come with a big political cost that we are already seeing as, it's there out in the media. So apart from this, I think the concerns over the repayment of international debt also and the level of reserves that we have right now, the state bank reserves are at $10 billion. So, and also like mentioned, the Pak rupee against dollar has hit the historic low. And so the thing is, and also the political uncertainty, I think all these factors combined together have made all the financial markets in Pakistan uncertain, and obviously we are seeing that investors are panicking a lot. If I talk about the stock market alone, so we have seen outflow consistently, and despite sectors performing well, despite companies posting record profits, unfortunately, due to all these exogenous factors, and even endogenous factors, the factors within Pakistan, these all have led to an uncertainty in the investors' community. And I think until there's clarity on the IMF front, the negotiations going on with the IMF, I think this situation, unfortunately, is there to stay. And people out there are waiting for a clarity. Although the acting governor yesterday did mention that he's hopeful that the negotiations are going to go through, and we hopefully will pass this seventh review. And he also mentioned that he'll be surprised if IMF does not release any letter of comfort following the negotiations that are ending on the 25th. So hopefully progress is there, and just waiting for the positive note from IMF and obviously from the Pakistani authorities.
But please do comment on this very important issue. IMF or no IMF, obviously if there is no IMF deal, this is what I've been hearing from the senior politicians and the cabinet members of the current government, that what if the IMF doesn't agree with you on softer terms and conditions? They really want you to make sure that the tariffs should be increased, subsidies should be withdrawn, and on top, the most important factor is that, if subsidies withdrawn on petroleum products, the prices might go well over $200 a liter. Ma'am, that is going to create a lot of impact, not price-wise, but the overall impact and the compound factors put together will be horrible for the economy, because most likely the inflation, according to certain analysts and according to certain economists, they believe that it could go beyond 18%, perhaps a little under 20%. Ma'am, that is going to be a killer and a half.
Absolutely. See, thing is, with IMF, there always comes conditions, and this time around, the conditions are going to be stringent. Let's be very honest with ourselves. So the thing is, conditions that were laid down in previous reviews, we did fulfill most of them, but obviously there were certain left unchecked and unticked. So thing is, at the moment, thing is, we have given the subsidy which, although the government said it was fully funded, but let's look at the reality, the kind of situation we are in right now. Our reserves are depleting. We don't have external funding. We are only relying on the domestic borrowing for our deficit. So obviously, with this liquidity crunch, with your foreign investors not pouring in investment, and there are no influx. There's no influx of capital. So at this situation, obviously, giving subsidy doesn't really make sense. And moreover, you were talking about inflation, so absolutely. So first thing that the IMF would want us to do is to reverse or to remove this subsidy package completely. And it can be in phase-wise manner or in one go. There's clarity yet to come on that front. So you've correctly pointed out that if they do it in, let's suppose, even in one go, so inflation can go as high as 17%. Even we are of the view that it can touch around 17%. So keeping that in mind, 17% means your policy rate needs further adjustment. You currently are at 13.7. Yes, absolutely. You are currently at 13.75. You cannot run a negative real interest rate.
Exactly, that is the point. Because who is going to borrow money from the bank at this interest under these given circumstances, and on top such political uncertainty? That is going to be, I mean, it's the worst possible combo. So if you allow me, Sardar Sahab, we have been joined in by Dr. Niaz Murtaza Sahab. He's a political commentator and a political analyst, and I would like to ask him about the importance of political certainty in the country. Now, Niaz Sahab, first of all, welcome to the show. It's been a while that we have been together in a program, but sir, good honor for me to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
Explain to our viewers that how important political certainty is. Currently, nobody knows what's going on in Punjab, whether Shehbaz Sharif's son Hamza Shehbaz is the chief minister or is not the chief minister, how much authority the president has to still keep the governor in Punjab, Mr. Cheema, at his post. Talking about the turmoil in Balochistan, we all know that everybody is ready to again present the no confidence motion against the chief minister. You hear the politicians, their daggers drawn. Look at the current situation in Islamabad. I mean, it seems as if all the containers from all over the globe have been accumulated and put in Islamabad. I mean, this is what it seems like. God forbidden, if something happens tomorrow, if there is a clash, something happens. I hope it doesn't, but the current scenario seems to be pretty tricky. It is going to really impact on our economy, sir. And we have already talked about the IMF issue. We have talked about the inflation. We were just talking about the depreciation of rupee, for that matter, total ban on imports. I fail to understand where are we moving. It seems like that there is a rudderless plane and nowhere to go, perhaps. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you're right. We've had 4 economic crises since the turn of the century, and they've coincided with, the end of one government each, the Musharraf government, PPP, PMLN, and now PTI. So if I measure these 4 economic crises in terms of things like level of fiscal deficit, current account deficit, inflation, interest rate, level of, your foreign exchange reserves, GDP growth, the worst was, the one that Musharraf left behind. And the second most intense is the one that now PTI has left behind. But then, the other thing that we must keep in mind is what you were talking about, political crisis. So the last 3 ones did not coincide with political crisis inside the country. There was a smooth handover from Musharraf to PPP and so on. But now we have the second most intense economic crisis, together with perhaps the most intense political crisis of this century, the way, the daggers are drawn. So those two are combining to make life extremely difficult. And with, the dharna starting from tomorrow, this is perhaps the first time that there is going to be such a huge dharna in the middle of an economic crisis. So you can imagine what the impact is going to be. So political crisis, of course, exacerbate the economic crisis. The only good point is that, political crisis can end suddenly and very quickly as compared to economic crisis.
Absolutely.
If somebody can, put some sense into the heads of both sides and they can resolve their differences, then very quickly, the political crisis will end, but we will still be left with, the economic crisis, which is going to take a very long time. As I said, it's the second most intense, and interest rates are already so high, inflation is already so high, current account deficit. So in a sense, the two highest economic growths of Pakistan in the last 10 years were actually in years which were actually economic crisis. And both those high economic growth rates were actually responsible for the economic crisis, because the two governments pushed the pedal as hard as they could without worrying on the risks involved, that the car could go on the one side of the road or the other. And that's what has happened. We were going so fast with economic growth that it's created inflation, current account deficit, your fiscal deficit. And obviously now we are going to have a crash of the economic growth, and next year I think the growth rate will be much lower, just as happened in 2008 and 2018.
Well, pretty alarming, in fact, information. Now, sir, this war in Ukraine has triggered a very costly humanitarian crisis that demands a peaceful resolution, which I don't see, which nobody sees actually at the moment. At the same time, the economic damage from the conflict will also, I would say, contribute to a significant slowdown in the global economy. We were just talking about that. Obviously, triggering inflation because of fuel prices, fuel availability, and perhaps when you talk about the basic product, or the produce that we normally consume in Pakistan, so wheat. Yeah. And pulses. Now, 80% of the pulses are being imported. When I read this, I thought maybe 8% of what it was. 80%, yeah. And I was shocked because the poor man is dependent on wheat and pulses. Now, sir, talking about the programs like SAS program, or every government has introduced Benazir Income Support Fund for that matter. Do you think these are enough? These are also subsidies, basically, 200 billion, 1,500 billion a year. That's a lot of money. Is that going to serve the purpose, or you think the government really needs to, have that last sip and eventually just take a decision that, well, it is going to be tough, but it is going to be better at some stage? Because currently it seems that we are moving from worst to worst.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Doctor, I'll also take your comment on this, but let me put this question to Fahim Sardar Saab. He's our guest in the studio.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any kind of social protection program is meant to be a stop-gap arrangement. It's not there for a permanent. It's not there as a permanent feature.
Why is it being hailed by the international agencies for that matter?
Because it was effective. Because it was effective, it was smart, it was targeted, it was precise, it was direct, and it was done with a very intelligent mind. Now, at the end of the day, the functioning was quite intelligent. I repeat, a social protection program is supposed to be a stop-gap arrangement. It's not a permanent mechanism or structure or feature. Furthermore, any social protection program that is not backed by a business angle to it usually ends up just being a cost. I'll give you an example. When we speak of, for example, it's not a perfect example, but when we speak of China having raised 700 people out of poverty, they were raised through business processes, and that was done through government systems and schemes. So that you can see a similarity of a social protection program. You could call it a social business program. That's what China did. Because it was not a handout program, it was a business program. inclusive program. So that's what really brought in the value, that's what really helped China and the people. When it comes to Pakistan, we have to, and I'll go back to where I started from, the concept of being self-sufficient, the concept of being able to produce whatever you consume, you should be able to produce yourself, and especially when it comes to essentials. If Pakistan is importing pulses at the rate that we are, that is a very alarming thing for an agriculture country.
Edible oil.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the list of, keeping the oil import bill aside, the kind of consumption, the waste, it's unbelievable. Look at the amount of, for that matter, chemicals that we import. Look at the kind of money we spend on edible oil, around $3.8 to $4 billion.
I have to expand on that just a little bit. When it comes to edible oil, Pakistan did something amazing around about 12 years ago, which was to start an olive oil program.
Yeah.
And that has really matured in a good way, because we've started producing a lot of olive oil, and very soon we might be producing more than Spain.
Spain?
Yes. So that is
because we hear about Turkey, we hear about Spain, we hear about Portugal, Italy for that matter.
Pakistan is going to be joining the International Olive Council pretty soon. It's going to be formalized.
It's going to give us some sort of relief.
It's going to give a huge relief, because you substitute one for the other.
But sir, our people, I'm talking about the masses who literally believe in, just like we were having a word before that, do we need sugar in tea or tea in sugar? So that is exactly what the scene is in.
We'll have to work that out. But
how many people do actually use olive oil for that matter?
No, fair enough. Step by step. So at least we have to be fair. We have to bring up what has happened and what exists in the market. But having said that, for an agriculture country like Pakistan, not being able to produce pulses, just begs the question why. Secondly,
even wheat.
Yeah, 27 million tons is really, for Pakistan, it's really, we're really punching below our weight. We should be thinking of 40, 45 million tons.
Maybe more.
Of course.
And I'm not even sure about the population. That is another, because the Dari Sahib says we are around 30 crore. Official figures, somebody says 20 crore, somebody says 22. I mean, just imagine the difference.
No, absolutely. And the point is being self-sufficient in essentials is, I think, a national security matter. And this cannot be taken lightly. Importing a product because it's cheaper to import it is fine. That's a separate issue. But when it comes to essentials, we just cannot compromise on that any further, because Pakistan has been very, we can be very proud of this, that we've had our own food basket. Now, this is the first time that we're basically, our food basket is sort of grown a little smaller as compared to our population growth. But having said that, it's not easy. It's not.
When you say about the food basket, that means the amount an average person spends on food products or the produce in general. That was around 40%, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, and it basically also refers to how much you're basically producing for yourself. Because if you're not
food inflation, basically, I'm referring
to. That basically strengthens your security infrastructure, by the way. I'm not even getting into
security is a part of your national security
exactly.
policy also.
Yeah, and I'm not even getting into that right now. I'm just saying very simply, if we're producing wheat to the tune of 27 million tons a year, we should be targeting 40, 45 million. We have to start punching according to our weight now. The sixth largest country is typically the sixth largest producer of apricots, dates, we're the third largest producer of milk. Why is it that we're facing problems in these specific areas? And if the problem persists, that means our approach is slightly wrong.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, just imagine if we could have added some value in dairy products. We're importing cheese, we're importing butter, we're importing milk.
To be fair, and
when you talk about buffalo, so you must have lived abroad, and you have noticed that over there they use the cow milk and the cow produce and the byproducts. Over here, and when you talk about buffalo, because normally whenever we talk about buffalo, that is in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Primarily, we are mostly dependent. But over there, so the price of the buffalo produce is almost double. So, I mean, why can't we do that? I mean, look at India. I mean, whenever I look at their regular television or internet programs on food, sir, even somebody with a small shop is extensively using their Amul butter and pouring cheese like anything. I mean, over here, cheese is considered to be a very expensive product.
Okay, how can I put this? In normal peacetime, you can focus on business. Pakistan has come out of a war situation, and it's been a very ugly war. And it's not an excuse, this is a reality. Had the same thing happened to certain other countries, they would have disintegrated by now. Pakistan is facing issues, we have made a few mistakes, but we've also been able to manage ourselves quite decently given the circumstances. In a post-COVID scenario, at the tail end of COVID, which we don't know if it might come back or not, we were growing about 5%.
There's a monkey business now.
Monkeypox as well.
So unfortunately, I mean, perhaps a lot is going against. I mean, there's a tide we just want to go through, but let's see what happens. Now, coming to you, ma'am. First of all, ma'am, whenever we talk about the economic recovery, I think the ever highest growth rate that was achieved by Pakistan was 8.4%. Things were pretty good. Everything was moving in the right direction. Dollar was around 61 rupees. Things were okay. We were so-called the non-NATO ally. There was a military government or a man in uniform as the president who was calling the shots. America needed us. Things went well. Now, ma'am, this shying away from America, but now things most likely will improve because the foreign minister, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto, visited USA and then went to China. Ma'am, how important is the role of a country like United States of America, you know, to sort of give some ashirwad to a country like Pakistan? You think that ashirwad should be considered as a bailout package, ma'am? Like FATF for that matter, or a deal on less tougher, I would say, arrangement as far as IMF is concerned. I mean, this is what Americans can do.
Absolutely. Thing is, your foreign affairs matter a lot, obviously, especially in the current critical situation, both on the political and economic front. I think you have to have good ties with all your strategic partners, I would say. So be it America, be it China, be it any other country for that matter. So on the political front, obviously, you are an import-driven country, and your major trade partners are all these countries, right? So your import bill is floating, so you are getting a severe pressure from the import end, and that is obviously reflecting on your reserves position. So, and one more factor that you just highlighted is the FATF factor. We have reviewed you in June, so let's not forget June is around the corner. So obviously, with IMF pending, with FATF around the corner, so I think it is of utmost importance that we need to revisit our strategic ties with all the neighboring countries as well as with the US and all other strategic partners. And also from trade point of view, thing is we have opportunities like GSP status. We have got FTAs, free trade agreements. We need to take benefit of all.
Even if you have this GSP plus status, how can you compete in the international market with the cost of doing business skyrocketing, and I mean uncertainty prevailing everywhere? You know what I mean, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't gel well together.
You are absolutely correct. Thing is, there are structural issues within your economy. There are issues within your economic setup. Even rightly pointed that even if we have GSP status, but what about your exports? Are they like really taking benefit out of the status that you have been given for past many years? So we need to revisit our policies, I would say. So absolutely. So we need to focus more on the policies that bring about reforms in the structural setup of the economy. We need to focus more on value-added products. Although we have kind of like we reported the highest ever export this month. So that was a good positive, I think, news on the economic front. But I think this is not enough. We need, like it is said that we need to do more, but I think we need to do more on the economic front, and keeping all the strategic partners, having cordial relationships with all the partners, because it is the need of the hour, and we are in dire need of capital inflow, and we do need reserves to build up, and for that obviously we need investment, I would say, coming in, not loans, not aid or grants for that matter. Obviously, I think for long term, the only way around this is to get foreign direct investment. Right now, you're only dependent, not only, I would say, highly dependent on China for FDI, and that's
Correct.
coming in power sector only.
And nothing
So we
coming
need
in
to
from anywhere else, to be very honest. I mean, and when you talk about the FDI, I think that is the most important component. Now, last question, because I was just told that we are running out of time. Niyaz Murtaza Saab, it's a very important factor whether we like it or the current government likes it or doesn't. The interesting part is that when we talk about diaspora, which is living abroad, sir, and the amount of remittances, mashallah, alhamdulillah, they're increasing with each passing month and each passing year. Niyaz Saab, the kind of dissatisfaction that the non-resident Pakistanis or the overseas Pakistanis, as we call them, they have shown in the current government, because it's a reality, whether it's the state TV or not, the reality is a reality, and I think I should talk about it, maybe whatever it takes, but the reality is that trust deficit. When we talk about the electronic voting machines, everybody is saying that we are giving, literally, they have provided us the ventilator, because when the government says that we are on a ventilator, that ventilator has been provided by the people living abroad, the non-resident Pakistanis, and they're not happy, and we all know that's a reality. Forget about the politics for a moment, but sir, what if they just make sure that they will not send the money to Pakistan, or not that much? That is going to put any government in pressure. You talk about exports, you just can't overnight change the dynamics of your economy and start exporting. It's not a cow whom you start milking and the next day she's going to give you butter and the very next day cheese, and after 4 days maybe in a packaging format. No sir, it is not going to happen either. Structural reforms are so important, we always talk about it. Tax collection, we have been crying, and we all know, because it's a political decision which is not going to favor the majority. So these, landlords and all these people, I mean, they're not happy with it. I mean, considering all these factors, sir, moving forward seems to be very difficult. It's just like running again, in the direction of the wind, and that seems to be a very, very tough situation. Niyaz Saab.
Well, I don't know if there's a very strong correlation between which government is in power and how much remittances come in. Obviously, there is a...
But Niyaz Saab, despite all political differences, you know what I'm talking about, and it's a reality in one way or the other. Please, sir.
And I can prove that, because the highest growth rate among the three parties in remittances that we've had was actually